The old master stood in the center of the private room, his silk uniform pressed to perfection, 40 years of discipline written into every line of his weathered face. Across from him, a young man in plain black pants and no shirt waited, his body lean and coiled like a spring under tension. In 11 seconds, one of them would be gasping for air on the floor, and the other would be on his knees but not in victory. It was 1965, and the martial arts world in America's Chinatown communities was fracturing. Bruce Lee had just completed his demonstration at the Long Beach International Karate Championships, and the traditional kung fu establishment was seething. What they had witnessed wasn't kung fu as they knew it. It wasn't the flowing forms passed down through generations, the ceremonial stances held in temple courtyards, the patient accumulation of kata repeated 10,000 times. It was something else, something stripped down, something that looked, to their trained eyes, like a betrayal wrapped in Western arrogance. But was it really a betrayal, or was it the first honest conversation martial arts had ever had with reality? The master, let's call him Sifu-chan, though his real name has been lost to the discretion of witnesses, had spent 4 decades in the traditional Hung Gar style. His horse stance could hold for an hour. His iron palm could break 3 bricks. His forms were textbook perfect, every movement a mirror of the movements his master had shown him, which were mirrors of movements stretching back 200 years. He had opened a school in San Francisco's Chinatown, where he taught the old ways to young Chinese Americans who were desperate to connect with the heritage they were losing in the assimilation machine of 1960s America. And then Bruce Lee had appeared on their television screens, moving in ways that seemed to disrespect everything they held sacred. This man is a fraud, Sifu-chan had told his students after watching a grainy recording of the Long Beach demonstration. He shows our secrets to outsiders. He changes our art to please white audiences. He dishonors the masters who came before. His voice carried the weight of genuine pain, not just anger, but heartbreak. To him, Bruce Lee wasn't just wrong, he was dangerous. He was a virus infecting the pure bloodline of Chinese martial tradition. But could tradition survive in a world that was changing faster than forms could adapt? The challenge came through intermediaries, as these things always did. A neutral location was arranged, a private training hall in Oakland, borrowed for the evening. No cameras, no press, just witnesses from both sides, there to verify what would happen when philosophy met physics. Sifu-chan arrived with 3 of his senior students, men who had trained under him for over a decade each. Bruce Lee arrived alone, which should have been the first warning sign. A man who brings no backup either has nothing to prove or nothing to fear. The room smelled of old wood and tiger balm, that sharp eucalyptus camphor scent that clings to every traditional kun. Afternoon light filtered through high windows, casting long shadows across the practice floor. The space was maybe 30 feet square, with practice dummies lined against one wall and a small shrine to Guan Yu, the warrior saint, in the corner. Incense smoke curled upward in lazy spirals. The air felt thick, not with humidity but with expectation. Something important was about to happen, and everyone present could feel it in their bones. Sifu-chan spoke first, his English accented but clear. I have watched your demonstration. You dishonor the traditional ways. You teach outsiders our sacred knowledge. You change the forms to make them. He searched for the word, his face twisting with distaste. Flashy. For entertainment. Kung Fu is not entertainment. It is a lifetime of discipline. Each sentence landed like a formal accusation, the kind that demanded an answer, the kind that couldn't be ignored without losing face completely. Bruce Lee stood with his hands at his sides, his expression neutral. Those who were there remember his eyes. Not angry, not defensive, but intensely focused, like a camera lens adjusting to perfect clarity. He let the silence stretch for a moment, then spoke in Cantonese first, then English, making sure everyone understood. Sifu, I respect your training. I respect your dedication. But I must ask you, when did you last use your kung fu in a real fight? Not a demonstration. Not a tournament with rules. A real fight, where someone actually wanted to hurt you. The question hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation. Sifu-chan's face flushed. His students shifted uncomfortably. One of them started to speak, but Chun raised a hand to silence him. "The old ways have been tested for centuries," he said, his voice harder now. "You are young. You think you have discovered something new, but you have only discovered disrespect." "Then show me," Bruce Lee said simply. "Show me that the traditional way works. Not in the air, not in forms. Show me on me." He gestured to the empty space between them. The invitation was clear. No rules, no referees, just function meeting theory, and may the honest approach win. What happened next would be discussed in kwons and dojos for decades, though the details would change with each telling, like a legend polishing itself through repetition. But the witnesses who were actually there, and some of them are still alive, still unwilling to speak publicly, remember it with crystalline clarity, the way trauma or transcendence burns moments into memory forever. Sifu Chun stepped forward, dropping into a perfect horse stance, his hands rising into the classical hung guard position. One hand high, one hand chambered at the hip, exactly as it had been taught to him, exactly as he had taught it to hundreds of students. His breathing was controlled. His balance was impeccable. 40 years of training had made his body a machine of traditional precision. He looked, in that moment, like a figure from an ancient scroll painting come to life. Bruce Lee stood in what appeared to be no stance at all, weight slightly on his back foot, hands loose and low, body angled. To traditional eyes, he looked vulnerable, unrooted, amateur. Where was his structure? Where was his base? How could he generate power from such a casual position? But that was the point, wasn't it? That was the entire revolution compressed into a posture. Power doesn't come from looking powerful. Chun attacked. Not wildly, not stupidly, but with a proper chain punch combination. The kind that had won him tournaments, the kind that his lineage had refined over generations. His first punch came from the chambered position at his hip, rotating his whole body into it, exactly as the textbooks demanded. It was technically perfect. It was also, by modern combat standards, telegraphed from a mile away. Bruce Lee's hand moved. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that would look impressive on film. It just suddenly existed between Chen's punch and Chen's face, redirecting the incoming force with a simple pack saw. A slapping block that didn't meet force with force, but guided it past its target. And in the same breath, the same heartbeat, Bruce's other hand had already arrived. The 1-inch punch is now famous, demonstrated on video, analyzed in physics classes, mythologized in popular culture. But witnessing it in person, witnesses said, was a different experience entirely. There was no wind-up, no chambering, no classical transfer of weight from back foot to front foot through the hips into the shoulders through the arm into the fist. It just happened. Bruce's fist was an inch from Chen's solar plexus, that vulnerable cluster of nerves just below the sternum, and then it wasn't. And then Chun wasn't standing anymore. The sound was distinctive. Not the sharp crack of a knockout punch to the jaw, but a deep, hollow thump, like a mallet hitting a taiko drum. And then Sifu Chen's eyes went wide. Not with pain exactly, with shock, with the sudden, primal terror of not being able to breathe. The solar plexus is a cluster of nerves called the celiac plexus, and when it's struck with sufficient force at the right angle, it sends the diaphragm into spasm. The diaphragm is the muscle that controls breathing. When it contracts, air enters. When it relaxes, air exits. When it spasms, it locks. You can't inhale. You can't exhale. Your lungs scream for air, but your body won't obey. It's not permanent. The spasm releases after seconds or minutes. But while it's happening, your entire world collapses into a single, desperate thought. Breathe. Please, just let me breathe. Chun dropped to his knees, his hands clutching his chest, his mouth open in a silent gasp that wouldn't come. His face was turning red, then purple. His students rushed forward, but Bruce raised a hand, stopping them. "Give him space," he said firmly. "He'll be okay. Just wait." But Bruce didn't wait. He didn't stand there in victory, hands raised, celebrating his dominance. Instead, he did something nobody expected. He dropped to his knees beside Sifu Chen. Not above him, not standing while the older man knelt. Beside him, at eye level, in a position of equality. His hand went to Chen's back, rubbing in slow circles, and he spoke in Cantonese. his voice low and steady. Breathe slowly, Sifu. Small breaths. Don't panic. It will pass. I promise it will pass. The room was silent except for Chen's desperate attempts to pull air into locked lungs. His students stood frozen, torn between rushing to their master's aid and respecting Bruce's clear authority in this moment. The witnesses from Bruce's side stood equally still, understanding that what they were seeing wasn't just a fight aftermath. It was something else, something more important. 30 seconds passed. Then 40. Chen's breathing started to return, shallow at first, then deeper. The purple faded from his face. His hands loosened their grip on his chest. And as his eyes cleared, as the panic subsided, he found himself staring directly into Bruce Lee's face, and what he saw there wasn't triumph. It was concern. It was improbably respect. I'm sorry, Sifu, Bruce said quietly, still in Cantonese. I didn't want to hurt you, but you asked me to show you. This is what works. Not because it's new, not because it's disrespectful, but because it's honest. Because it's based on what the body actually does, not what we wish it would do. Chun sat back on his heels, his breathing now almost normal, and for a long moment he just stared at this young man who had just destroyed 40 years of his assumptions in 11 seconds and was now apologizing for it. His students moved closer now, helping him to his feet, their faces a mixture of shame, confusion, and something else. Curiosity, perhaps. The same question written across all their faces. If everything we've learned is wrong, what's right? Bruce stood as well, and then did something that witnesses still mention when they tell the story. He bowed. Not a small nod. A full, formal bow, the kind you give to a master, a teacher, someone worthy of deep respect. Your dedication is not wasted, Sifu, he said. Your discipline is not wasted. But maybe it could be focused differently. Not throwing out tradition, but asking, what part of tradition serves function, and what part serves ceremony? Sifu Chun straightened his uniform, his hands still slightly shaky. His pride had been demolished, but something else was being built in its place. Not shame, but possibility. He looked at Bruce for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. How did you learn to hit like that? And that was the crack in the dam. That was the moment when philosophy stopped being armor and started being a prison door swinging open. Bruce smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but a genuine one. I can show you, he said, if you want to learn. No secrets. No gatekeeping. Just what works. The traditional martial arts world in America's Chinatown communities would spend the next decade grappling with what happened in that room. Some would double down on tradition, insisting that Bruce Lee was a fluke, an outlier, a disrespectful upstart who got lucky. But others, more and more over time, would begin to ask the same question Chun asked. What actually works? What deserves to be preserved because it's effective, and what are we preserving just because it's old? Bruce Lee never publicized that encounter. He never used it to boost his reputation, never mentioned Sifu Chen by name in interviews, never turned it into promotional material. Those who were there kept it quiet out of respect for everyone involved. But the story leaked out anyway, the way truth always does, spreading through the underground network of martial artists who recognized that something important had shifted. The one-inch punch became famous, but the 11 seconds before Chun could breathe again remained a whisper. And the image of Bruce Lee on his knees beside a defeated opponent became something else entirely. Not a story of dominance, but a story of what strength actually looks like when it's paired with wisdom. Power without compassion is just violence. Victory without grace is just cruelty. What happened in that Oakland Kun wasn't a fight. It was a teaching, delivered in the only language that pride could understand. Experience. In the years that followed, some of Sifu Chen's students would quietly seek out Bruce's training. Not abandoning their traditional school, but supplementing it, asking questions they'd never been allowed to ask before. And Chen himself, according to some sources, began incorporating new ideas into his teaching, not replacing the old forms, but contextualizing them differently. Asking his students not just to perfect the movements, but to understand when they would actually work and when they were ceremonial, historical, preserved for their beauty rather than their function. The martial arts world loves its legends, the unbeatable masters, the secret techniques, the mystical powers developed through decades of secluded training. But the truth is usually more interesting than the legend. The truth is that progress happens not when the old generation defeats the young, and not when the young generation defeats the old, but when both sides are humble enough to ask, what if we're both right about some things and wrong about others? Bruce Lee's revolution wasn't about destroying tradition. It was about interrogating it. It was about taking every technique, every form, every principle and asking the most dangerous question in any established system. Why? Why do we do it this way? Because it works, or because it's always been done this way? And if the answer is just tradition, just lineage, just because my master taught me, then maybe it's time to test it against reality and keep only what survives. That's what happened in 11 seconds in Oakland. Not a destruction of the old ways, but an invitation to evolve them. Not disrespect, but the deepest form of respect. Taking something seriously enough to demand that it prove itself, and helping it stand back up when it falls short. So here's the question that still echoes from that afternoon. What are you preserving in your own life, in your work, your relationships, your understanding of the world? Not because it works, but because it's comfortable? Not because it's true, but because it's familiar? And if someone showed you a better way, would you have the courage to kneel beside them and ask them to teach you? Because that's what strength actually looks like. Not the punch that drops someone to their knees, but the hand that helps them back up.